Julia Morgan had never been a woman who asked for much. She came from a modest background, just a girl with sharp instincts, a quiet kind of brilliance, and a loyalty so fierce it often worked against her. So when she met Daniel Wexler, the ambitious son of a powerful real estate family, she didn't fall for his bank account. She fell for the dream they promised to build together. And build they did. Dear viewers, welcome to our channel. Subscribe to receive more stories every day. Years. That's how long Julia worked side by side with her husband. Early mornings, late nights, and missed holidays weren't sacrifices. They were investments. She learned the business, studied the market, met with clients, and slowly helped transform Wexler Realty from a local firm into a recognizable name in the region. But ask anyone in Daniel's family, and they'd tell you, Julia was just the wife. Until Daniel served her with divorce papers. At their anniversary dinner, started 3 months earlier, subtle at first, Daniel grew colder. His texts turned into one-word answers. His business trips doubled, then tripled. He came home smelling like a cologne she didn't buy him and smiling at jokes she never heard. Julia noticed, of course, but she waited. She gave him space. That's what loyal wives did, right? Then came the dinner. 10 years to the day. Julia had booked a private rooftop, candles flickering in the warm evening air. She wore the dress Daniel used to love, the one that hugged her figure just right. She even wrote him a letter. But when he arrived, his expression was unreadable. "Let's not pretend," he said flatly, sliding a manila envelope across the table. Julia blinked. "What is this? I think it's best if we end things now." Cleanly. Quietly. Inside the envelope, divorce papers. Already signed by him. No conversation. No explanation. Just done. The days that followed were a blur of numbness and disbelief. Daniel moved fast. Too fast. Their joint accounts. Frozen. Her business email. The office where she once sat as co-founder. Cleared out. And the worst part. He wasn't alone. His family was behind it all, smirking in silence like they'd been waiting for this moment. "You were never on the documents," his mother, Eleanor Wexler, said, when Julia showed up at the family estate to ask for an explanation. "You may have helped, but legally. This was always Daniel's firm. His money. His house. His life. I built that company," Julia whispered, her voice trembling. "I worked every hour. As a wife. Not a partner." Then came the final blow, the house. The very house she decorated, designed, and made into a home. The deed. In Daniel's name. At least that's what they said. Julia didn't even have time to fight before the sheriff's notice arrived. She had 14 days to vacate. Julia moved into a small apartment on the west side of town. The kind of place with creaky floors and neighbors who played their TVs too loud. Her once luxury SUV was repossessed. Daniel had gifted it to her, but kept the title in his name, just like everything else. For weeks, Julia barely left the apartment. She felt humiliated, used. Her calls to mutual friends went unanswered. Her name, once respected in business circles, now carried the stain of scandal. Rumors swirled, she cheated. She lied. She was mentally unstable. The Wexlers had made sure of that. Then one morning a letter arrived. No return address. No name. Just one line inside. "Check the original contracts. Look at the deeds." Julia stared at the paper for a long time. It was probably a prank. But something stirred in her. A pulse of defiance she hadn't felt in weeks. So she began digging. She started with the company's early documents. The ones she and Daniel had signed in the back room of a lawyer's office when they were still newlyweds with a dream. It was slow work. Most of the files had been wiped from her old email, and she no longer had access to their server. But Julia remembered one thing. She'd made printed copies. She kept them in a fireproof box, back when she still believed in rainy days. The box had been in storage. Forgotten, dusty, but intact. Inside were dozens of contracts, agreements, and filings. Julia combed through them for hours. And then she saw it. name on the original property purchase of the Wexler building. On 2 development sites they'd bought in her name for tax reasons. On several LLCs created during the company's expansion. Julia's hands shook. They'd overlooked it, or assumed she had forgotten. But her name, her signature, was everywhere in those early days. She wasn't just Daniel's wife. She had been an owner, founder, and that meant something. 3 weeks later, word spread through the business community. Nathaniel Wexler, Daniel's father and the founder of Wexler Realty, had passed away. Quiet, unexpected. The Wexlers were devastated, or at least they played the part. Nathaniel had been the iron spine of the company, ruthless, brilliant, old school. And Julia had been the only one in the family he'd ever shown warmth to. She remembered the quiet talks they had at family dinners, how he once said, "You're the only one who works like it matters. The rest just want the spotlight." And now, the will was to be read. Daniel and his siblings gathered at the law office on a Thursday morning, dressed in black, eyes gleaming with expectation. The Wexler fortune was vast. Properties, stocks, offshore accounts, millions. They were already celebrating in hushed tones, sipping expensive coffee. And then Julia walked in. Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Daniel's jaw tightened. "You have no place here," Eleanor snapped. Julia smiled, soft and steady. "Oh, I think I do." "You're not family," Daniel said. "That's the thing," Julia said, turning to the attorney. "Mr. Portman, would you kindly begin?" The lawyer nodded, barely hiding his smirk. He had known Julia for years, knew her work ethic, knew Nathaniel's respect for her, and most importantly, he knew what was coming next. Mr. Portman cleared his throat. "This will is a legally binding document, revised and signed 6 weeks before Mr. Wexler's passing." The room shifted. Chairs creaked. Daniel exchanged a glance with his mother. Mr. Portman continued. Clause 32 reads as follows. All Wexler Realty properties, both current and future, as well as all Wexler family trust assets, are to be managed, distributed, or liquidated at the sole discretion of one individual. He paused. The room held its breath. Julia Morgan. The air went out of the room. Eleanor stood. What? She's not even. Portman raised a hand. There's more. He slid a stack of documents across the table to Daniel. These deeds and partnership agreements from the company's founding were quietly notarized and witnessed. Julia's name appears on multiple original ownership documents. Legally, she is a co-founder. Julia leaned forward, voice calm but firm. You stole what you thought I didn't understand. But you forgot who was actually holding the foundation. Daniel's face paled. And this was only the beginning. They didn't scream, not at first. After the will was read, the room sat in silence. Not the stunned, hollow kind, but something tighter, meaner. Like the air before a thunderclap. Daniel stared at the documents, his hand twitching as he flipped through the pages. Forgery, he muttered. Not possible, Julia said, arms crossed. Your father had it all notarized by your family lawyer. It's dated, sealed, and witnessed by 3 parties, including your cousin Leo. Leo, seated in the corner, suddenly looked as if he wanted to disappear. Mr. Portman leaned forward. There's also a video if we'd like to play it. Daniel slammed his hands on the table. You manipulated him. He was old, confused. Sharp enough to see what you were doing, Julia replied. And that's when the gloves came off. The Wexlers didn't go quietly. Well, they came at Julia with everything they had. Within 48 hours, Julia was served with a motion to contest the will on the grounds of mental incompetence. Their lawyers filed injunctions, froze asset transfers, and launched a smear campaign in the press. The tabloids were fed stories about her being a greedy ex, an unstable social climber, and even a failed entrepreneur. One headline read, Gold Digger Hijacks Wexler Empire. Was it all a long con? Julia expected it. She had braced for this exact moment. What she hadn't expected was how many people, quietly behind the scenes, reached out to her. Former assistants, junior partners, even Nathaniel's old driver. People who had seen what she did for the company, who remembered how she treated them when the rest of the Wexlers looked through them like air. One of them, a retired paralegal named Grace, sent Julia a message. "They never gave you credit, but you were always the real boss." Nathaniel knew it. We all did. In the quiet hours of the night, Julia would sit in her small apartment, still too proud to move into the estate she now legally controlled, and read those messages. Each one was a balm to the wounds still healing beneath her poised exterior. She missed the love she thought she had, missed the version of Daniel she'd believed in. But that man was gone long before the anniversary dinner. What stood before her now was a wolf in custom tailoring, backed by a pack of equally ruthless kin. But Julia had something they didn't: the truth and receipts. The court date arrived with the gray drizzle of a stormy morning. The hearing was to determine whether Nathaniel's will would hold or if the Wexler's challenge would be upheld. The courtroom was packed. Lawyers, reporters, curious businessmen. Julia sat alone at her table, dressed in a sharp navy suit and pearls, her armor. On the other side, Daniel sat flanked by high-powered attorneys and his seething mother, Eleanor. Their argument was simple. Nathaniel was confused in his final days. Julia had manipulated him into rewriting the will. Her name on the old deeds. Clerical error. Julia stood. Her voice was clear, steady. "I worked for Wexler Realty from the day it started until the day I was erased from it. I built it beside Daniel. I signed contracts, led meetings, closed deals. I didn't ask for recognition. But I won't let them rewrite history." She passed a USB to the judge. The courtroom watched in silence as Nathaniel's face appeared on the screen. The video was dated 6 weeks before his death. He looked directly into the camera, eyes as sharp as ever. "If you're watching this, I'm likely dead. Let me be clear. My son and his siblings didn't earn this company. Julia did. She saw it grow from an idea on a napkin. She's the one who kept us afloat in 2013. She's the reason Wexler Realty still exists. I trust her more than I trust anyone else in this family. That's why she's getting control, not just because she deserves it, but because she earned it." There was no room for debate after that. The judge ruled in Julia's favor. The will stood. The properties were hers. The trust, also hers. The company, temporarily frozen, but she was now the majority stakeholder. Daniel was livid. Eleanor collapsed in her chair. Julia didn't smile. Not yet. Victory wasn't about smugness. It was about truth being seen. Outside, microphones and cameras waited. One reporter shouted, "Ms. Morgan, any comment on the verdict?" Julia paused. "I didn't win anything. I reclaimed what they tried to steal. There's a difference." A memory came unbidden. Julia 5 years ago working late in the office. Daniel walking in behind her carrying takeout. He kissed her temple, told her how proud he was. She hadn't known then that he was already hiding assets in shell companies. That he was registering her contributions under his name. That he was preparing to cut her out. The realization hit her all over again. Not with pain but with clarity. She hadn't lost him. She'd been freed from him. Back at the Wexler estate, Daniel was spiraling. His lawyers were quitting. Investors were pulling out. His siblings were furious. They blamed him for letting Julia back in the door. "You should have bought her silence," his brother snapped. "I tried," Daniel shouted. She wouldn't take the damn offer. But Julia had never wanted money. Not really. She wanted her dignity back. Her truth. Her voice. And now she had all three. Weeks passed. Julia moved into a modest but modern home. Not the estate, but a place she could call hers. She reopened her consulting business. People called her crazy for not keeping the Wexler company intact. But Julia had plans. She started selling off assets. Not recklessly, but with precision. She kept the properties she had helped develop and sold the ones she had been cut out of. She rebranded under her own name. Morgan Real Assets. Simple, clean, unapologetic. Clients came calling. Investors who'd once ghosted her were now eager for a piece of her new vision. And Julia? She had never looked more radiant. One morning she received a package. No name, just a thick envelope inside. Inside it were documents. Copies of bank transfers, LLC filings, emails between Daniel and his accountant. They were dated years back. And they told a story Julia hadn't known. Daniel had been laundering money through the company, using her signature on fake contracts, naming her on shell companies that he'd later abandoned, without her knowledge. And if she wasn't careful, she could be held liable. Julia stared at the papers. Her hands were still. There was one last game left to play. And this time, she wasn't just going to reclaim her name. She was going to destroy his. Julia stared at the documents in her hands. Dozens of them. All pointing to the same cold truth. Daniel hadn't just betrayed her emotionally. He'd used her name, her signature, to cover his financial crimes. The LLCs, the offshore accounts, the dummy investments that went nowhere. He had tied it all back to her. Some of the fake businesses even bore her initials. It wasn't just fraud. It was calculated sabotage. If someone went digging, she could be dragged into the pit right alongside him. And Daniel had always been the kind of man who'd smile while watching someone else take the fall. But Julia didn't panic. She planned. She spent a week quietly cross-referencing the documents, building a trail from each suspicious account to Daniel's signature. His digital login history, his fingerprints. She also met with someone she hadn't spoken to in months. David Wells, an old friend and forensic accountant she'd once helped through a messy divorce. He owed her. And now, it was time to collect. David spent 2 days reviewing the materials. When he returned, his face was pale. Julia. This isn't just shady. It's criminal. He was laundering funds through fake real estate deals and diverting charitable donations from the Wexler Foundation. If the IRS sees this, he'll go to prison, she asked flatly. David nodded. Oh yeah, for a long time. Julia didn't go to the authorities. Not yet. Instead, she sent a single message to Daniel through a legal intermediary. Meet me. One time. No lawyers. You know where. He showed up 2 days later. Smug, suited, and still under the delusion that he held the leash. They met at the rooftop of the first building they ever bought together. It was now hers. He lit a cigar like he still owned something. I have to say, Daniel said, grinning, I almost admire it. You played this beautifully, Jules. Julia didn't smile. She dropped a thick folder between them. He flipped it open. Froze. His smirk cracked. Where did you get these? She leaned forward. You used my name. My signature. My ID. It's just paperwork. It's a federal offense, Daniel. He laughed nervously. You wouldn't go to the feds. I already did. His smile vanished. But here's the thing, Julia added. They don't know it yet. This meeting is your one and only chance to stop this from becoming your mugshot. He swallowed hard. What do you want? She slid another paper across the table. It was short, direct, brutal, full confession. A transfer of all remaining assets. Resignation from every Wexler board position. Public statement admitting misconduct and clearing Julia's name of all wrongdoing. Daniel's eyes darted. This'll ruin me. You did that yourself, she said, rising. Sign it or don't. Either way, the outcome is the same. The difference is whether you walk out of here a disgraced businessman or get dragged out in cuffs. He stared at the pen. He signed. The news broke 3 days later. Daniel Wexler resigns amid financial misconduct scandal. Ex-wife cleared of all involvement. Julia Morgan praised for exposing corruption. Launches new foundation. Reporters begged Julia for interviews. Major outlets offered six-figure deals for exclusives. She gave none. Instead, she released a short video. This isn't about revenge. It's about truth. I loved a man who became someone else. I gave my time, my loyalty, my trust. And for that I was betrayed. But I never stopped believing in who I am. I never stopped building. This is just the beginning. Eleanor Wexler tried to keep up appearances. But with Daniel out, donors pulled from the foundation. The Wexler name no longer opened doors, it closed them. She showed up at Julia's new office one afternoon, unannounced. "You've destroyed this family." Julia looked up slowly. "No, Eleanor. You did that. I just survived it." Eleanor stared at her. "Nathaniel loved you more than his own children." Julia's smile was faint. "Because he saw what you never could. Value beyond bloodline." She stood and opened the door. "We're done here." Eleanor walked out without another word. Months passed. Julia moved into a new penthouse downtown. Not extravagant but stunning. Every inch of it was designed by her. Paid for by her. No shadows of Daniel. No ghosts of the Wexlers. Her new firm, Morgan Real Assets, was thriving. She employed dozens, many of whom had been laid off during Daniel's mismanagement. She prioritized women-led businesses, ethical investments, and transparency. She had also founded the Deed Initiative, a non-profit dedicated to helping women navigate legal protections in business partnerships and marriages. Her inbox overflowed with thank you messages. One evening, Julia sat at her desk, opening the last of her mail. Small envelope. No return address. Inside, a handwritten note. "You never knew this, but I added your name to the deeds on purpose. I always suspected they'd turn on you. I just didn't know when. You were the only one who deserved to inherit Wexler. You didn't marry into wealth, Julia. You created it. N.W." Julia's hands trembled slightly as she read the initials. Nathaniel Wexler. He had planned it. Long before his death. He had known. Her eyes welled. But she didn't cry. She just sat back in her chair and let the city lights shimmer through the window. For the first time in years, she felt whole. Julia's book was already a bestseller. The name on the deed, What They Took, What I Reclaimed. Her TED Talk hit 12 million views in a week. She walked into a gala wearing a crimson gown and a soft smile. Her presence turned heads, not because she was flashy, but because she owned the room. Daniel. He was living in Florida, working as a consultant. Under investigation. Quiet. Forgotten. Julia. She wasn't just the woman who survived. She was the woman who built the empire they tried to steal. And now the world finally knew. Her name was always on the deed. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. Share with us what you think of this story and tell us where you're watching from.